Today is Tuesday, May 24th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Yesterday, I recorded a talk that I think is pretty important, and I strongly recommend it. If you haven't listened to it already, it's titled "The Ends and Motives of Catholic Parenting." The Ends and Motives in Catholic Parenting. I recommend that as a general discussion of some of the principles of Catholic parenting that we need to have right before we can succeed in other areas as Catholic parents. And in this talk today, I'm going to be talking to homeschool parents, and the topic is going to be how to make children study. How to make children study. As homeschool parents, we take upon ourselves the responsibility for planning, directing, supervising, assessing, motivating our children's studies. As I always say, it's an incredibly challenging task that is grossly underestimated by homeschooling parents. Homeschooling parents really have no idea how difficult the work is that they're getting into, and it requires wisdom and skill and perseverance. In this talk today, I'd like to get into some practical details about how to make your children study, because I see homeschooling parents failing miserably in leading their Catholic children in their Catholic homes to actually study the content of a true Catholic education. What many parents are doing in the name of homeschooling is simply following the public schools. If you look at a program like Seton Homeschool, it's a public school program that's just dressed up with pictures of saints and angels. Those saints, if they were alive today, would not be studying Seton homeschool materials. They didn't study them in the past, and they wouldn't study them in the present. The saints studied the classical liberal arts. You can study any saint biography, any quality, detailed saint biography, and learn that they studied a classical Catholic curriculum. A program like Seton, which is just a model of many homeschool programs, simply dumbs down Catholic education to the point where children are merely checking the boxes of the requirements of public school education. The public schools were not designed to educate children. The public schools were not designed to provide Christian children with an ideal course of instruction. The public schools were designed to provide students who had no other educational opportunities with a minimum basic education. And yet, in this generation, we find Catholics offering that education to their children. It's really hard to comprehend, but that's the reality that we see. And so there are many homeschool families who pretend like they have things together because they have all of their workbook pages done in a few hours each day, but they're not providing their children with anything that any Catholic school in history would consider a Catholic education. They're providing their children with a minimal public school education at home. And it's easy to look like you have everything together when you're not actually achieving the objectives of a Catholic education. And this appearance is deceitful, and many homeschool parents are deceived by it. You get on Instagram or Facebook and you see pictures of the homeschool room, and it's all decorated and organized. The books are on the shelves and the kids are all dressed nice, and it looks so attractive until you realize that all they're doing is organizing and dressing up an education that's not sufficient for Catholic children. They're simply ignoring the challenges of the true objectives and goals of Catholic education. When we focus on the true goals and objectives of Catholic education, we find that we have a very difficult task. We have a very difficult task. And we have to have practical wisdom to know how to actually lead our children to do the work and satisfy these objectives. So in this talk, I'd like to get into some of the practical details and talk about how to make children study when we're aiming at the true goals and objectives of Catholic education. The first problem, as I said, is that Catholic families aren't focused on the right goals, so they don't even know what needs to be studied. And the number one reason why this happens is because the Catholic parents themselves have not studied and don't study. They don't even know what should be studied. They can't comprehend what the saints studied in the past. They can't comprehend the intellectual culture that was known to the saints, and therefore when it's time to educate their own children, they really have no idea what is to be done. And the first rule that I'll give you, the first rule for how to make your children study is you need to study. The first rule, the first practical step to make your children study is for you to study. You have to study. You have to create the intellectual culture. That intellectual culture needs to be established by your own pursuit of Catholic learning. You have to study. You have to say to your children, "Come, follow me, let's study." You have to study. And the more that you study, the more that you learn, the more you're going to be able to understand and offer to your children. You cannot give what you do not have. You have to study. That's the first and most important practical step to make your children study. The reason why it's so important for you to study is because you have to reflect on your own experience studying to think of what the children need to do. If I sit down to study, or if there's something that I'd like to study, let's say that I'd like to study Thomas Aquinas's Summa Contra Gentiles, a work written by Thomas Aquinas. I want to study this work. I have to know how to study. And I wrote an article on the Academy website titled How to Study for Mastery, and I recommend you get a hold of that article and read through it. There's a link to it on the left menu of the Academy website. How to Study for Mastery. If you yourself study for mastery, you'll understand the process and what needs to be done. Most parents don't know how to study for mastery. How many Catholic parents who are homeschooling their children were top students themselves? How many knew how to earn A's? How many knew how to score perfect tests, perfect scores on exams? Many of the Catholic parents homeschooling really don't know how to study themselves. And this is the first problem. When we need to study something for mastery, not just to pass a test, not just to get a grade, not just to get a diploma, but for life, the first thing we need to do is we need to learn what we need to learn. We need to learn what we actually are going to study and what needs to be studied, what needs to be learned. Normally what I do when there's a book that I'd like to study is I begin by just listening to it as an audiobook. When I go running or if I'm sitting at my desk, I'll just put the book on in audiobook format and I'll just listen through the whole book. I'll just let it play and listen. And all I'm doing is surveying the book. I'm just listening to learn what content is actually in the book and where it's at to prepare myself to study. And so I'll simply listen to the book read as an audiobook. No stopping, no pausing, no backing up and replaying. I'll just let it play and listen. I may be doing other things at the time. Like I said, I may be out running, but I'll listen through a book just to become familiar with the content. Once I've become familiar with the content, then I'll really begin to study. And I'll begin going back through the work chapter by chapter, page by page, studying, taking notes, and learning the content in detail. As I go through and take notes, I'll start to see key lines, key sentences, definitions, rules, and I'll underline those or write them down, and I'll commit them to memory. And by the time I'm done with the study, I'll have all of the important points memorized and ready in my mind for use. I'll have an outline in my head of the work itself, and I'll have a pretty good memory of where things are in the book for future reference. And that's when I know that I've studied a work for mastery. I can use it after I've studied it. If I'm writing an article, if I'm teaching a lesson, if I have to make a decision or do something, I can go get information from the books that I've studied when I need it. That's studying for mastery. If we don't study ourselves, we don't become familiar with that process. We don't know what it feels like. We don't know how it works. And we can't lead others to study. And that's why good teachers are great students first. They learn how to study. They know what it feels like to study, and they can help their students study. So the first practical skill is you need to study. You need to learn how to study by your own experience, because that will help you to make your children study. Now, when I study, I don't find a comfortable place. I don't go sit on the couch. I don't put my feet up. I don't lay down. I don't sit in front of the fireplace with a glass of wine to study, because study is work. Study is work. When we study, we should be in work mode. We should be in a work environment. There should be a formal place for studying where our children are when they study, and we should also be in such a place when we study. The place where we study should be well lit. It should be relatively uncomfortable, because we have to work, we have to be alert, we have to stay up, sit up straight. It needs to be a workplace where we study, because study is work. We need to be in a mode, a frame of mind that's ready for work, that's working. We shouldn't sit on the couch. We shouldn't lay on the floor. We shouldn't be in bed. We shouldn't be in some comfortable place, like sitting on a blanket under a tree. People always have these ideas that we should make ourselves comfortable and study, but the opposite is true. The opposite is true. We will never study well if we're in a comfortable situation. We have to understand that study is work. And we should have a place, if we're homeschooling, we should have a place in the home that is a workplace where we study. Whether it's a dining room table, whether it's a dedicated schoolroom, whatever, it should be a place for study because there's work to do. It's a workshop. The classroom is a workshop. We're working in the study. The way that we go about our studies has to be conducive to productivity. It has to be a place where we can work. Children should be on wood benches or in hard chairs, sitting at a table, standing up. It should be well lit, like I said. It should be a place where they can work that helps them to stay alert and get work done. It can't be a cushiony, comfortable place where they're going to get sleepy. It can't be warm and toasty and snuggly where they start to fall asleep. It should be uncomfortable, like a workshop, because there's work to do. Many parents like this idea of homeschooling with kids on couches and the kids are on the floor, and it looks attractive because it looks so comfortable, but those kids aren't getting studies done. Don't be deceived by the pictures. That's not how study gets done. Study needs to be active because it's work, and this is what parents need to do to make their children study. What parents would like to do, the temptation for homeschool parents, the fantasy for Catholic parents, is to give their children books, have their children go off, sit quietly with a book, and learn. But that's not how study works. Study is not a leisurely, quiet activity. And we all know that. Study is active. Students need to be speaking and chanting, walking around, moving, standing up, writing, and so on. Study is active. And in order to make our children study, we have to have active, measurable tasks for them to complete. The assignment cannot be, read this book. There's no way for a parent to assess that. There's no way for a parent to know if the child's actually doing it. And for the child, there's no way for the child to know if he's actually doing it. There's no way for a child to know if he's reading well enough or if he's understanding things. It's not fair to tell a child to go read a book. That's not study. That's more like watching television or surfing the web. If there's a lesson that needs to be read, the child should be given the lesson and told to stand up and read it out loud. The reading should be done out loud. When the child reads out loud, the mother, and I say mother because usually the homeschooling parent is the mother can hear the child reading. The mother can hear if the child is reading correctly. The mother can hear if the child understands based on the child's expression. The mother can hear and know that the child is reading every line, every sentence, every paragraph of the assigned text. It's an active, measurable task. So when there's something to read, the child should be made to read it out loud. And you can work on reading skills, you can work on speaking skills, you can work on manner and gestures in reading and speaking, and you can also learn the content and know that the child is reading it with some degree of comprehension, because, as I said, you can tell by the expression in the reading whether the child is understanding what he's reading. So make the child sit up straight or stand up and read the text aloud. It's an active, measurable task, and the mother can know that it's being done. A child sitting on a couch with a book, or sitting in another room with a book, or even worse, with a computer, the parent has no idea what the child's doing. And it's not the child's fault when the mother finds out that he's actually not studying. It was a stupid arrangement. There's no way that that's going to work. I can tell you that up front. Just like if you wander off to the couch with a book, you're also going to be distracted. You know that. And if you want to study, you should do the same thing yourself. Take the book, stand up, and read it out loud. An active, measurable task. So that's the first practical study skill, to make your children study. You can make the child read the lesson out loud. An active, measurable task. Memory work should be recited. Make the child recite the memory work out loud. Not go take this to your room and memorize it. No. Make the child recite the memory work out loud. An active, measurable task. Is your child reciting his memory work? Yes. How do you know that? You can hear him and watch him as he recites it. It's an active, measurable task. Other activities that can be used. Make the child take notes. Have a child write an outline for whatever he's studying. Have him read it out loud. Have him stop and jot down key points, or go through it with him and make an outline together. Identify important definitions and rules in the reading. Active, measurable tasks. When the child has an assignment to do, anytime the child has a task to do, or he's got to do some quiet work, he's got to sit and answer questions or write something, set a time limit. Make it short. Let's say a child's got comprehension questions to answer for a certain lesson. Give him 15 minutes. Set an alarm on your phone to go off in 15 minutes, and in 15 minutes, check and see what he's done. Don't leave him there for an hour. Don't give him the afternoon. Give him 15 minutes. 15 minutes to work. If there are 10 comprehension questions, tell him to answer the first 2 in 15 minutes. Come back and check in 15 minutes. See what he's done. See that he's getting the work done. Set the timer for another 15 minutes. Give him 2 more questions, 3 more questions to answer and get done. Break the assignments and the tasks up into small, manageable pieces. Set timers and check every 15 minutes. Don't leave the child for hours. Don't leave him with a computer. Don't leave him in another room. Short time limits and periodic, frequent checking of progress. That's how to make the child study and get the work done. I hear parents complaining all the time about computers, and it's a bunch of baloney. The kind of trouble kids get into on computers is only possible when they're left unsupervised for long periods of time. The computer is an amazing tool. The internet is an amazing, useful resource. Parents have to manage their children intelligently so that they can make use of those resources and not have to have them taken away because the parents refuse to supervise, or the parents put the children in situations that not even the parents would be able to handle responsibly. I hear the complaints all the time from parents about how they don't want their children on computers, but what they really are saying is, I'm looking for a way that I can give my child something to do, keep my child active, and I don't want to supervise them. I want to leave them alone for long periods of time, and the computer doesn't allow for this. That's what parents are really saying, because the computer itself is not a problem. The internet itself is not a problem. Long periods of unsupervised activity is the actual problem. Parents need to learn to supervise the children, set short time limits for activities, and check on them regularly. In farming, there's a principle of management, and this is true of business in general. But I'll focus on farming because this is where the saying came from. It says, the eye of the master makes the cattle fat. The eye of the master makes the cattle fat. And what that means is, in the old days when farm work was handled by servants, if the master thought that he could just leave the animals with the servants, that they would do all the work and he would collect all the profit, he was kidding himself, because the servants wouldn't work. The servants would do what they needed to do to avoid getting in trouble. They would work when the master was looking, and when the master was away, they would play. They would relax, they would let things go, and they would just do what was necessary to avoid getting in trouble. If the master was constantly supervising the work of the servants, they would have to keep working. And that's why the saying says, the eye of the master makes the cattle fat. When the master is watching and supervising, the servants work and the animals are well cared for, well fed, and they get fat as they're supposed to. The eye of a master makes the cattle fat. And this is true of all management. This is true of studies as well. Unsupervised children will not study. Unsupervised children will not study. It's not the children's fault. If a child was so virtuous as to be able to study without supervision, he wouldn't even need an education. He'd already be a saint. It's not realistic. If you leave a child alone for an hour and find out that he goofed around and didn't do anything, it's not because he's a bad child. It's because he's being badly managed by his parents. Children need to be supervised. That's what parents are for. That's why when they're sent to school, they're subject to teachers. They're not left to study. If kids could do that, we wouldn't need schools in the first place. Children are foolish by their inexperience. They're not going to do the work that they're supposed to do. They're not going to be responsible. They're not going to stay on task. And you already know that in advance. Leaving them then in a situation where they're not going to be supervised is just setting them up to fail. And then yelling at them as if what they're doing is incomprehensible is simply hypocritical, because you do the same thing and you know it. Children have to be supervised. Their work has to be managed in a way that's active and measurable. If they're left alone to a task, it needs to be a simple task for a brief amount of time. And they need to know that for the next 15 minutes, they have work to do, and mom is going to come back when this timer goes off, and she's going to check to see that that work was done. and there need to be consequences if it's not done. If the 2 questions were not answered, the child needs to lose something. He needs to lose 15 minutes of recess time. He needs to lose a snack. He needs to lose some benefit that's available. And if he does his work, and when his work is checked, the tasks are done, he needs to be rewarded and motivated to use his time well. But he needs to be supervised, and the parents need to set short task time limits and check constantly when those time limits expire. Active, measurable tasks, short time limits on tasks. Now, one of the benefits in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is the parent doesn't have to worry about the content of the answers, because we take care of grading. The parent needs to simply submit the student's work, or the student needs to submit his own work when it's finished. But the parents can check to see that the questions are being answered, and just check for simple, superficial things like whether the answers are written in complete sentences, whether all the questions have been answered, things like that. The parent doesn't need to get into the quality of the answers or the details of the content, because we take care of that for parents. But there are simple, superficial things for parents to check to see that the kids are getting work done. And if the assignments are divided into shorter pieces, and the children are given short periods of time to work, and the parents come and check at the end of those short periods of time, and the parents reward and punish the children for their use of the time, you'll find that the children can be made to get their work done and keep progressing hour by hour through the day. So that's a second principle. A third principle, and again, this is a benefit in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, is that we have online quizzes. So even if a child is online, working on a computer, the quizzes are timed. The parent can give the child a quiz to work on, and the parent can see that the quiz has a 10-minute time limit or a 20-minute time limit. And so the parent can know that the child has 10 minutes to complete this quiz. I can set a timer for 10 minutes and come back, and the student will be done with the quiz, and that's it. There's no problems. The parent can then look at the score the child earned, and the child should have a decent score. The parent can make sure the child answered all the questions. Again, the parent is not responsible to assess the quality of the student work, because we take care of that. The quiz itself scores the student's work. But the parent can make sure that the kid wasn't fooling around, because all the questions were answered. And like I said, there's a time limit. And we set the time limits on quizzes to be pretty tight, because we want the kids to feel a time pressure, and they have to know that they have to work quickly if they're going to pass the quiz or exam. So we do that on purpose. We do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, so the kids can't be idle on computers. We limit the amount of time that they need to be on a computer for a quiz by setting a tight time limit, and it also prevents, at least to some degree, their ability to cheat. They don't have time to look up answers. They don't have time to look at notes or look at lessons, because the questions have to be answered every 10 seconds or so, and they need to move quickly. They need to know the material and move quickly in order to get the quiz done and earn a passing score, which is usually 90% or higher. So we design the quizzes to prevent many of the problems that the kids face. If parents would practice these simple, practical steps, almost all of the problems in homeschooling would be eliminated. Children can pursue the highest standards of learning. Children can pursue the highest objectives in Catholic education, because our curriculum provides those studies. The studies that a child can pursue in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy are not limited by the parents' education, even though the parents are encouraged to study themselves for many different reasons. We provide students the opportunity to have a real Catholic education at home, regardless of their parents' education. The content of our study materials is actually challenging and engaging. It's real content. It's not workbook filler, busy work nonsense that no one wants to study. The content of our studies, the content of our lessons is real wisdom, and the children can sense that. Our study materials can actually sustain the interest of children because it's wise material written by history's wisest and best men. It's not junk written by publishers who are just trying to get stuff to print for sale. Our content is interesting. Our content is satisfying in the sense that children can feel themselves really progressing in knowledge as they work through it, because there is real progress, because these are real arts and sciences, not just nonsense modern school classes designed to check boxes. Memory work is easy for children to focus on, and they can feel themselves making progress as they complete each point of memory work. It's satisfying work. The quizzes are challenging. The time limits put pressure on the students and they feel challenged. It's good for them to feel that way. Our grading of assignments is expert and careful. I read every single sentence every student writes and submits. I make sure that every question is answered correctly, and if it's not, I send it back to the student. There's no way to slip through a lesson. There's no busy work, no junk assignments just for grades for the teacher's grade book. The students have to submit quality work, and parents are not responsible to make sure that their work is of that quality, but can leave that work to us since it's our life's work. Parents, however, have to manage their children's studies in a way that's reasonable and productive. They have to know how to make their children study, and they have to avoid the errors that most homeschool families commit. And just to review, the first error is not studying themselves, not being sincere about the importance of study. Parents have to set a good example. They have to make an effort to study. They have to show themselves sincere. Parents have to say daily prayers. Parents have to go to daily mass if they can. Parents have to set the example of being serious about studies. Parents themselves have to be studying the books that they recommend and urge upon their children. Parents have to be studying the scriptures. Parents have to be studying the Catholic Catechism. When children see that, they're going to see that it's serious. It's serious enough that dad takes time to study it. It's serious enough that you can ask dad questions about your lessons because he himself works to study and learn these things. Think of the difference that creates in the mind of a child, knowing that what he's working on studying, his father has also studied or is working to study. His mother talks about with his father. His father talks about with his friends. Think of the difference that makes in a child's view of his studies. It's very significant, very influential. The intellectual culture of the family will largely influence the study activity and interest of the children. All study activities need to be active, measurable tasks. And there are many things that can be done to help with this that modern parents consider to be a waste of time or tedious or unnecessary. For example, if you need to walk away from your child for 10 minutes and you would like him to study a lesson, tell him to copy the lesson out on a sheet of paper. Don't leave him there silent with a book. Don't leave him there unsupervised. Give him an active, measurable task. Tell him, I need to go and start supper. While I'm in the kitchen, I would like you to study this page of your lesson. I would like you to copy this entire page into your notebook and practice good handwriting. And when I come back, I'm going to look to see that you've copied this page from your book. That's an active, measurable task. Telling the child, while I'm in the kitchen, read this page. That's not a measurable task. It's not an active, measurable task. Or to have the child go with you into the kitchen and say to the child, while I'm preparing the supper, I'd like you to read this chapter out loud. And you can listen to the child read. You can ask the child questions as he goes. You can tell the child to back up and reread a sentence if he doesn't express it with understanding. That is an active, measurable task. Take this online quiz and earn a passing score. That's an active, measurable task. Recite this memory work, and after 10 minutes, I'm going to quiz you on it. Or when you have it memorized, come and I'll ask you the question and see if you can recite it from memory, and I'll mark it complete. That's an active, measurable task. Go read a book is not an active, measurable task. Work on your computer is not an active, measurable task. And this is why children in homeschool settings, as well as in schools, don't study and waste horrible amounts of time in idleness, goofing around. It's because the parents and teachers don't give the children active, measurable tasks to perform. It's the teacher's fault. It's the parents' fault. They're poorly managing their children's studies. So by setting the intellectual culture in the home, by managing the children's activities so they always have active, measurable tasks, by leaving the assessment of quality to us as we grade assignments, but focusing on simple, measurable objectives like neatness, completeness, answering with complete sentences, answering every question, completing the quiz within the time limit, earning passing scores on online quizzes, completing memory work, completing timed tasks throughout the day, rewarding and punishing children based on their measurable work. These are the things that homeschooling parents need to do to make their children study. It's what good teachers do. Good teachers know how to make children study. When I was a classroom teacher, the first thing we did in every class was we started with a quiz. A quiz on their homework assignment, a quiz on our last class. Every class started with a quiz. And every student knew that their quiz was going into the grade book and was going to affect their semester grade. I would conduct the quiz with the students. I would grade the quiz with the students. I'd have them trade papers and grade each other's papers. I would go over every question, ask the students to tell me the answers. We would grade their papers, and I would have the children, the students in the classes, read their grades out loud, and I would write them in the grade book. And the first 30 minutes of every class was active, measurable tasks. The students had to read out loud. The students had to recite memory work. The students had to copy passages that I wanted them to study. Everything was active and measurable. That's how study gets done. Teachers have to know how to manage students and make them study. If you practice these things, and like I said, the work of homeschooling is very difficult, you're going to find that for most of the challenges of the homeschool, you, the parent, are the limiting factor. If you give the children the right content in the right format with the right kinds of tasks assigned, you're going to find that they do just fine. You're going to find, however, that you are the limiting factor. And the goal in choosing a homeschool program and ordering your homeschool is to make yourself the limiting factor. That's how you know that things are right. If you are the limiting factor, then you know that your children's success is in your control. And as the parent, that's what you want to feel. You want to know that the pressure is on you, the parent, and if you do this and do that and get this done and get that done, the children will succeed. Most homeschool programs don't do that. Most homeschool programs, like I said, are merely serving bottom-of-the-barrel public school requirements. They're not interesting to the students. They're not challenging to the students. They don't provide active, measurable tasks to keep the children constantly working and progressing. They're not satisfying. They're not useful in real life. They're artificial school materials designed only for the modern public school idea of education. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy is a totally different animal because we offer children direct access to the real classical Catholic curriculum, which they can study and use for their entire lives. When you get your homeschool set up rightly, you will feel that you are the limiting factor. And that's a good place to be because it puts your children's success in your hands. And being the Catholic adult, you are the one who has access to grace, who can pray and fast and sacrifice and carry out the works of mercy as a parent to get that work done. It's your own personal challenge as a Catholic, your own apostolate, as it were. And that's a good place for you to be. That's a good place for a Catholic to be. In that place, under that pressure, pressured to seek grace and to work and to pray and live out an active Catholic apostolate as a homeschooling parent. We offer you help with all of our assessment, support, grading, record keeping, all of the work that we do to research and restore and make the curriculum available to you at home. And we do it so ridiculously affordably. The student plan now costs $10 per month, and kids have access to all of this stuff, including online quizzes, including assignment grading, $10 a month. It's ridiculous. But what the kids are going to need to succeed is they're going to need homeschooling parents that manage their studies rightly. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need a classical education, although you should be pursuing one. But what you do need is to manage their activity so that they're active, their tasks are measurable, they're not left unsupervised, they're not left idle, they're not comfortable, they're not relaxed like this is movie time. Study is work. And if you manage their studies rightly as a homeschool parent, you can successfully make your children study. It's hard work, but that's what Catholics should be up for. They should be up for that challenge. You read about the saints, you see the amazing works that they performed. You have access to that grace as a Catholic. You need to seek it. You need to fulfill this work of Catholic parenting. You've undertaken this challenge of homeschooling. It's an awesome task, but you need to manage it wisely. You need to manage it effectively. You need to succeed in this work of homeschooling, not just think you're doing someone a favor by signing up for homeschooling and then managing it foolishly and leaving your children in idleness, poorly prepared, poorly managed, provided with poor materials, focused on standards that are far too low and not worthy of Catholic education. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, you have all of this, but you need to manage it rightly. You need to make your children study. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions about these things, please send them along. I'd love to get into more detail. If there are specific challenges you face, if there's something you wish I talked about that I left out, let me know and I'll get into it and make sure we talk through it and try to help find the solutions that we need to succeed as Catholic homeschooling parents. I'm in it myself. My wife's in it with me. We know all the challenges. We have all the same problems you do. It's hard work. It's constant work. We have to manage it wisely and persevere to the end. And we can do it because we have access to the grace that's necessary for this work. God bless.